Hi everyone, we've finally made it. It is May, it is the last couple weeks of school, and it is the last unit, the Civil War. What I look forward to every year, normally most people's favorite unit. Unfortunately, getting the short shrift this year, having to do everything online, but um, we're going to go through the material nonetheless. I am going to divide this up the way I normally do, and we're going to take it 1 year at a time. Now, there's a lot of content, and I want to jam in as much as I possibly can. So, I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of the Spark Notes version of the Civil War 1 year at a time. Today will be 1861. We will fly through this. It's one of the shorter years. 1861, 1865 are two of the shorter years. So we'll start this thing here in a second with 1861. Then in the future, for each class, we'll do 62, 63, 64. They're a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth, very, very bloody. We'll fly through all that as best we can. I'll try to keep these videos as short as I possibly can. There's just a few questions that go along with each. And we should be able to squeeze everything in just in time for the school year to be over. So hopefully you guys are watching this. Pretty important content. I will do the best I can to summarize it for you in as short a time period as I possibly can. If you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me if any of you guys are interested in this stuff, or I touch on a subject that you would like more information on. Let me know. I have about 1.5 million books in the classroom, a lot of good resources online. So, if there's anything else you guys need from me when it comes to this stuff, please do not hesitate to ask. So, without further ado, let's get going with the first year of the war, 1861. So where are we at? Just so we remember. And I can tell from my YouTube hits that, one, I'm not going to be a YouTube star, and two, many of you are not watching this. So if you guys are just picking this back up, here is the situation as it stands. Abraham Lincoln has been elected president in 1860, and immediately 7 Southern slave states secede. They've left the Union. However, there are 8 slave states that remain in the Union, that have not left the United States. Lincoln is coming into office in March of 1861, and he is going to try to keep as many of those states in the Union, what we're going to call the North, right? The United States. He's going to try to keep as many of these states in as possible, whereas at the same time, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, is trying to recruit as many of those 8 slave states into the Confederacy, into the South, with the rebels, whatever you want to call them. That is what he is trying to do. So that is a situation that they face. If you look at it on the map here, these magenta states, we'll call them these magenta states. That is the Confederacy. The states in green are free states that are in the Union, including Oregon, California, way out here in the West. The salmon-colored states, those are slave states that may or may not secede. And then you have the yellow states, which are also slave states. West Virginia is included here because it will become a state during this war. They're also slaves. So all of this area here, little Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, all the way over to Missouri, Arkansas, they are all slave states. Those are the states that are up for grabs between Lincoln, the Union, Davis, and the Confederacy. So all of this is going to come to a head in April. So right after Lincoln's taken office. He's not in office very long. He takes over as president in March of 1861 and immediately tells those 8 southern states, those 8 slave states, along with the Confederacy, he's not going to touch slavery. He's not trying to come into your plantation, free any slaves. That's not what he's about. He is just going to he just wants to limit the expansion of slavery. The 7 southern states that have seceded into the Confederacy, they don't care. They don't want to hear it. They're past talking. And the flashpoint for all of this is going to come at a place called Fort Sumter. It is located in Charleston Harbor. It is on a man-made island. here in the middle of the harbor. If you're ever in Charleston, it's a pretty neat historical site to go to. I've gone a couple of times. It is what the majority of the pictures of my phone are of. It's a pretty cool place at Fort Sumter, and it is, as you can tell by its name, it's a fort. It's a U.S.-controlled fort in the middle of Charleston Harbor. Now, Charleston Harbor is a very important harbor in the South. Charleston is the capital city, the biggest, most important city in South Carolina. And South Carolina is the state that seceded first and is really the state that has been at the leading edge of all of this, right? Remember the whole tariff issue and nullification? That was South Carolina. John C. Calhoun, one of the biggest, the guys were called fire eaters, one of the biggest fire eaters. He from South Carolina. South Carolina is kind of the heart and soul of the Confederacy at this point. And to have a fort that is occupied by the U.S. Army in the middle of the harbor that is going to be able to stop ships from coming in and going out, that is unacceptable to Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy. Now, the Confederacy has seized pretty much every other piece of government property in the South. Post offices, forts, things like that. The Confederacy has said, this is ours now. But Fort Sumter, because it's on an island, is a little harder to get at. They've asked the commander of Fort Sumter to surrender. They've asked the small garrison there to surrender. They've asked Lincoln to surrender the fort, but everyone has refused. In fact, Lincoln, he says, I can't just give you this fort. I don't recognize you as a country. I can't just give this fort away. We're going to hold on to it. Now, the problem with this is the garrison, the number of people in the fort, not very large. They don't have unlimited ammunition. They don't have unlimited supplies. They are on an island. And the fort itself, not quite finished. It's not 100% done yet. So he doesn't want to give the fort up, but holding on to it indefinitely, also not an option. Now, Jefferson Davis and the Confederates demand the fort. But since Lincoln has said no, they are kind of faced with, well, do we wait it out? Do we let them hold on to it? That's kind of humiliating to us. Or do we try to take it by force? Now, things eventually are going to come to a head because of the resource issue. Eventually, these guys are going to run out of food. And Lincoln is faced with a dilemma, right? These people, he can't let Major Anderson and the garrison on Fort Sumter starve, but he doesn't want to just give it up either. So he comes up with a pretty smart plan where he is going to resupply the fort, but only with food. He's only going to send food. And he lets Jefferson Davis and the Confederates know, using this newfangled technology called the telegraph, he sends them a message to say, listen, I'm sending a ship to Fort Sumter. It only has food. I'm not sending more men. I am not sending any ammunition, no guns, no weapons, nothing like that. It's just food, so these guys, don't starve to death. Now the ball is in Jefferson Davis's court. He has to figure out, okay, what am I going to let this ship in with the food and have this standoff go on indefinitely? What am I going to do? And what Jefferson Davis decides to do is he's going to attack. He's not going to let the ship resupply the fort. He is not going to let this standoff drag on any longer. And so on April 12th, 1861, he gives the order and the Confederates open fire. They open fire from land with a bunch of cannons. They attack the fort. For 34 hours, they shell the fort at Fort Sumter. No one's killed. It is, for the bloodiest war ever in American history, it is a very bloodless start. It is the first shots of the war, so officially we can say that the war starts on April 12th. Tragically, there is a death after the fighting is over. In fact, when Major Anderson and the garrison, after 34 hours, they're out of ammunition, they're tired, somehow they're alive, they go ahead and surrender. Their honor has been fulfilled. They can go ahead and step down and save face, right? They're not going to look bad at this point if they surrender. So they surrender during a ceremony to lower the flag and give over the fort to the Confederates and evacuate. An ember that floats down and sets off a gunpowder explosion, and a guy is killed. So he would be the first death of the Civil War, but it's not actually in combat. So somehow all these guys survive for 34 hours of Confederate shelling, but there is a death or two after the shelling is officially over. But this is going to start the war. So the reaction, this is what's going to be really important here, is how are people in the North and the South going to react? Well, Lincoln says, hey, you've started a war, right? I didn't start a war. I didn't fire the first shots. Jefferson Davis, Confederacy, you started it. Now, this is important, especially at this time, for a lot of people in their justifications, right? You guys probably know, when you have siblings, or, you get into a fight at school or something, it's like, hey, I was just defending myself, right? My little brother attacked me. I only beat him up because he made me, right? It doesn't always fly with mom, but it's a better excuse than just hauling off and hitting him because you didn't like his face. So Lincoln gets to say, hey, I didn't start this fight. Jefferson Davis did. So he goes and he calls for 75,000 volunteers, and their term of service is going to last for 90 days. Now, what this is going to tell you, obviously, is one, Lincoln doesn't think it's going to last very long, 90 days. That's not a very long engagement. And 75,000 is going to be nothing compared to the amount of people that it is actually going to take. So Lincoln is thinking, it's not going to take a ton of guys. It's not going to take a ton of time, but I get this army of 75,000, 90 days, this whole thing will be over. Now, in reaction to Lincoln, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Arkansas all decide, okay, it's time to secede, because it is decision time for these 8 slave states. They have to now decide, okay, are we going to war? And whose side are we going to fight on? Are we going to fight with the free states, or are we going to fight against the free states? These 4 states opt to secede, bringing the number of Confederate states up to 11. But that still leaves 4 states, we're going to call them border states, that are slave states that have not seceded yet. The states of Maryland, Missouri, Delaware, and Kentucky. Now, Delaware, there's not much of a secessionist movement there. There's legitimately hardly any slaves at all. It's not a very big state. There's not much of a fight there. Missouri, kind of important, but it has a large enough contingent of anti-slavery or pro-northern factions that their government also opts not to secede. Kentucky, very important. It tries to stay neutral. Kentucky is a very important state geographically. In fact, Lincoln says if we lose Kentucky, we lose the war. And a lot of that's going to be due to rivers and geography and accessibility into the South, along with manpower and resources and things like that. It tries to stay neutral at first, but that means it's not actually seceding. And then there's Maryland. Maryland's going to be very important. Maryland's a weird state because depending on where you're at in Maryland, it's very southern or it's very much like West Virginia and Appalachian. So it, though, is going to be forcibly held in the Union because Washington, D.C., if you remember all the way back to the compromise between James Madison and Alexander Hamilton over where D.C. was going to be with Hamilton's economic plan, D.C. is surrounded on one side by Virginia and on the other side by Maryland. Well, Virginia has just seceded. If Maryland secedes as well, D.C. is an island. That would not be good. So Lincoln's going to take a bunch of actions, including the fancy term of suspending habeas corpus, which just means he might throw someone in Maryland in jail and not charge them with anything, which he gets a bad rap for, maybe deservedly, maybe not, but he's going to hold Maryland forcibly. But these states are going to be very important in terms of manpower, in terms of geography, in terms of resources. If the South of the Confederacy could get their hands on most of these states, that would probably be enough for them to win the war. In fact, as important as Lincoln thinks Kentucky is, there might not even be a war if Kentucky secedes. So these states are going to be very, very, very important, and eventually In 1863, West Virginia will be added to this list of border states as well. So what we have here, and you can tell by just the shape of these states, important rivers, right? You have the Ohio flowing down here. You got the Mississippi here. There are a number of other rivers that flow through. D.C. is over in here where Maryland's on one side, Virginia's on the other. That if Maryland secedes, it's going to cut off Washington, D.C. So these border states really, really important for a lot of reasons. Now, the Union is going to hold on to all four and eventually gain with West Virginia all five of these states. So when we say the Union, it's not just free states, it's all the free states plus these 4 or 5 border states. Now, there is less slavery here than in, say, like, Georgia, but they are technically slave states. And yes, West Virginia is a slave state. When we become a state in 1863, we allow slavery. But more on that when we get to 1863. So what are we fighting for? What are the objectives, right? What is going on here? Very simple. If you are Lincoln or the Union or the North, whatever you want to call them, their goal is reunion at this point. That is it. That is the first goal. That is the only goal for Abraham Lincoln, for the president. His whole goal is take the country and get it back together, keep it together. He does not view secession as legal. He does not recognize the Confederacy as another country. He is looking at this as a rebellion. He's trying to stop the rebellion, put the country back together, keep the country together, but reunite the South, those 11 Confederate states, with all of the other states that have remained in the Union. Now, for Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy for the South, their goal is very simple: to be recognized as an independent sovereign country, right? They want, right, because we talked about this before with the American Revolution. Anyone can declare their independence. Anyone can say, hey, I'm a country. To really be a country, all the other countries have to go, yeah, you're right, you are another country. That's all the Confederacy is trying to do. Jefferson Davis is trying to get other countries, the Union, right? Most notably at first, Great Britain, France, places like that, to say, hey, guess what? You're a country, Confederacy. We recognize you as the Confederate States of America. And eventually for the Union, for Lincoln, or hopefully another president, to say, yeah, you're a country. We're a country. You're a country. We're two different countries. That's what winning means. So that is how this war is going to be decided. Either the Confederacy goes, okay, fine, we're not our own country, and then the Union wins, or the Union says, fine, you are your own country, and the Confederacy wins. Both sides feel that's going to be pretty easy to do. It's not going to take much time. It's not going to take much manpower. It's not going to be very bloody. Both sides think they're going to win. The South thinks that, the northern guys don't know how to use a gun. They don't know how to ride a horse. They're weak. They're not outside doing hard physical manual labor anymore. They're effeminate. They're not nearly as manly as a Southerner, right? Most Southerners at this time thought that one good Southern man was worth 5 or 10 weak, effeminate Northern men. And so they're like, they can't possibly stand up to us. We'll fire at them. They'll run away. The Union feels like we got a ton of dudes. We got a ton of money. We got a ton of technology. We're an actual real country. We're going to show up. And our superior numbers, our superior firepower, the Confederacy will wilt. And that'll be the end of the war. Both, in fact, think that it'll probably last about one battle. They think the whole war will probably be one battle. Whatever side wins will win the war. Now, there are some distinct advantages and disadvantages for each side. For the Union, it's pretty simple. They have the material advantages. If you can count it, right? If it's tangible, it's a Union advantage. So they have way more guys, way more dudes. They have way more stuff. They have all the railroads. They have all of the manufacturing, all of the factories. They have a lot more money. They have a ton more railroad mileage. They have a bunch of pretty much all of the tangible advantages. So when it comes to putting an army in the field, they're going to be able to put a larger army with more guns, more cannons, more ammunition, more food, more money, and they're going to be able to get around on trains. That's a pretty distinct advantage, especially in what is going to turn out to be a long war. Their problem is going to be they have terrible generals. That's going to be like the running joke of this war is Lincoln is going to fire guy after guy after guy after guy after guy. It's horrendous. And they're not as unified as the South. A lot of people in the North are okay with the war. Not everyone. The Democratic Party is still going to run people against Lincoln. Lincoln's going to have to run for re-election in 1864. And for a long time, it's going to look like he's going to lose, even though he has gone down in our history as one of the greatest presidents ever. Not everyone likes him. And the war is not super popular, especially when it gets really bloody. A lot of people in the North are going to just say, just let him go. Like, who cares? Now, the South, though, is the inverse. It is the exact opposite of the North. They don't have like any material supplies. They have a hard time with having guns, having ammunition, having food, right? You think of the South like, oh, they're super agrarian, right? It's all agriculture, it's all farms. They're not growing. They don't have enough food. And not only do they not always grow enough food, when they grow enough food, they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the railroads to move that food from the farm to the battlefront to feed the men all the time. So they just don't have the stuff. They don't have the people. They don't have the materials, right? They are going to have a hard time putting an army into the field, moving it around, having it well equipped, having it with enough food and resources. But the South is pretty unified, especially if you forget about the fact that there's 4 million slaves who probably are not rooting for the Confederacy to win. The white population is actually extremely unified. They believe in their cause, and they're going to have great generals. A lot of the generals you know from this war, Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, right? Those are Southern guys, and that is going to make a huge difference in this war. But you can see, right, here's the graph of the advantages and disadvantages, the bar graph here. It's all going to be Northern advantages except for cotton, right? And guess what? You can't shoot cotton balls out of your gun, out of your cannons, to win a war. So what good does that do you? But you know what does do you good? Making guns. 97% of the guns are made in the North. You know what does do you good? Having coal for your railroads. Having naval ships, right? 96% of the naval ships in the North. Right? The South doesn't have a navy. That's an issue. Merchant shipping. Yeah, that's an issue. Even farming. Way more farm acreage is in the North, which sounds surprising. But the people, right, 71% of the people, 81% of the free males, so those are the people who are doing the work in the factories, who are doing the fighting on the front lines. Those people are in the North. Huge, huge advantage. But, right, this should sound very familiar to you guys from when we talked about this exact topic for the American Revolution. Right? The North is the British. The North is the British in this war. The South is the United States in this war. In fact, that's exactly how the South saw this war. They said, this is our second war for independence. We have George Washington on our side. We have that old Patriot Army on our side. Because you know what? We might not have all the guns. We might not have as many guys. We might not be as powerful of a country. We're playing defense. We have home field advantage. Right? They have to come and conquer us, and we believe in our cause. In fact, the South is way more united in this war than the United States was in the American Revolution. Right? Remember, we talked about that. There were 1/3 or so, 25% or so of Americans were loyalists. You're not going to find 25% of the South being loyalists to the North. So the South has a lot of advantages, which is why this war is not going to be short. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be bloodless. So how, right? We know what they want to get out of the war. How are they going to get what they want out of the war? Well, the Union has to go into the South and conquer. That's very difficult. In fact, you might not think of the South as a large region, but we're talking from Texas over to the Atlantic Ocean and from the Gulf of Mexico up to Virginia, up to the border of West Virginia. That's actually a larger area than the British tried to conquer. Okay, so we're talking about a huge area geographically, right? Bigger than the original 13 colonies, much bigger than the original 13 colonies, with a lot more people. The Union has to invade, has to take it over, has to convince those people they're not going to be their own country, they need to quit. That's not going to be easy to do. So what the Union does is they come up with a plan eventually that we call, or they call the Anaconda Plan. Obviously, an anaconda is a snake, but it's not a poisonous snake. It's a snake that kills you by wrapping itself around you and squeezing you to death. And that is the Union plan here, where step one is a blockade. They are going to use their advantage of having a navy and the fact that the Confederacy does not really have a navy, and they're going to station their ships along the coast, along the harbors, and they're not going to let anything get in. They're not going to let anything get out, because the fear is, if you're Lincoln, the fear is they're going to grow their cotton. They're going to sell their cotton to places like Britain. They're going to buy ships and guns and ammunition and food and all of that, and really be able to make this a contest. So they're going to prevent that from happening by having a blockade. Step two is going to be control the Mississippi River. And if you control the Mississippi River, you will cut part of the Confederacy off here, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas, off from the rest of the Confederacy. And it will also be a highway, it'll be an interstate to invade different places. So it'll be easier to conquer, to invade and conquer, if you have entire control of the Mississippi. And then the last is capture Richmond. That is, once Virginia secedes, that becomes the capital of the Confederacy. And the thinking was, if you take the capital, especially if you can capture some of the important government people, then the government might fall, the war might end. So this is the 3 steps we're going to keep track of as the war progresses. Step 1 will go pretty well. Step 2 will go pretty well. Step 3 will be an unmitigated disaster for 4 years or so. Now, the South, just like when we talked about the Revolution, the South just has to win by not losing. Just don't lose. Just fight and fight. Don't quit. And eventually, the people in the North will get tired of the war, will get tired of the bloodshed, and they will quit. Just last longer than the Union, and you win, just like we did against the British. They're also going to take a page out of the old American Revolution playbook, and they're going to try to get help from Europe. They are going to turn to Britain and France and say, hey, you want to help us? You want to recognize us? You want to be our ally? You want to give us supplies? You want to trade? Join the war? Whatever. That would really go a long way. They are essentially trying to replay the American Revolution. And we have the gift of hindsight, right? We know that the Union's going to win, and they have these overwhelming material advantages. But at the time, most people, most odds makers, most kings around Europe thought that there's no way the Union's going to be able to actually win this. Well, now that the Confederacy has left, now that these 11 states have seceded, there's really not going to be much that the Union can do to conquer this large of a space, right? This is a pretty solid plan. There's no way the Union populace is going to put up with the taxes, is going to put up with the bloodshed, is going to put up with the just the overall resource drain. There's no way that this is going to happen. So keep in mind, as much as we might laugh here about how poorly things go over here in Richmond, this is a huge, huge test for the Union. And most people in the 1860s didn't think it could be done. Now, real quick, for you guys on what will become your last activity sheet, write quick summary. 1, what's the objective? What's each side trying to get? Because we got to always keep this in mind. The reason they act the way they act should go with their objective. There's going to be a couple times things happen and we're going to go, wait a minute, it doesn't exactly jive with what they're trying to do. So we got to always keep in mind, what is the objective and what's the strategy? So what do they want? How are they going to get it, right? Just a quick little summary, but these are important things to keep in mind for both sides, because in the future, things are going to happen and it might not jive with 1 or 2 of these, and we need to be able to see that, be able to point that out, and try to think through, well, why are they acting this way? Was that rational? Was that a good move? Was that worth the risk? That kind of stuff. So do that real quick, and then we're just about done. Before we get to the final thing for 1861, or almost the final thing for 1861, and the first and only real big battle of 1861. Before we get into the bloodshed, which is going to be a lot of the Civil War, we're going to talk a lot about battles. We need to talk a little bit about technology. This war is a very modern war. A lot of times people consider it the first modern war. It is going to be crazy bloody. It is the deadliest, bloodiest war in American history. We lose more Americans in the Civil War than World War I, than World War II, than any other war. And in fact, you lose more in the Civil War than you do in all of the previous wars combined and a lot of other wars that are to come. So the question a lot of times is why? Why is it so bloody? Well, the answer is going to be technology. And there's a lot of technology that plays huge roles in this war. Things like the telegraph allows information to flow from the front lines to the decision makers in the rear much quicker. Railroads have come about, and now you can move men around very quickly. So that actually plays a huge role in the battle we're going to talk about here in a minute. But the technology I want to focus on for a second is that of the rifle. The gun has changed a lot, and it is going to be the main reason so many people are going to die in this war. So if you don't know much about guns, in the past, almost every gun that has been used is what we would call a musket, like you see here. At the bottom on this 1842 Springfield musket. It's a 69 caliber, meaning it is a ginormous musket ball, huge. Unfortunately, I don't have my visual aids like I would if we were at school, where I have replica bullets and musket balls. But it's really, really big. If you think about it today, if you play video games or anything, like a 50 cal, it does crazy damage if you're using like a 50 cal sniper rifle. This is a 69 caliber, much bigger, puts a huge hole in whatever you shoot. But with a old musket like the 42 Springfield here, it is very ineffective. It's a round ball that comes down a smooth bore on the actual musket. The barrel is there's nothing inside of it, so it's like a baseball, like a smooth baseball, like a bowling ball coming out of there, really, because it's so large. It's like a bowling ball coming out of there. But it doesn't have good spin. It kind of bounces around in the barrel and doesn't go very far. The maximum range is 185 meters, right? The accurate range is 75 meters. So if you think about, like on a track, one full circle around a track is 400 meters. That's a quarter of a mile. This isn't even one straightaway to be accurate. So if you're trying to be accurate, you have to be very, very, very close, which is why when we talked about like the Revolution, everyone stood in like rectangles and fired at each other from close range. But even though they were doing that, not many people died. That's because the guns were so bad. Well, now we have moved up in the world into what we call rifles. And they are called rifles because inside the barrel are grooves. And the grooves catch the projectile and spin it. And so now, instead of shooting a bowling ball, you're shooting something that's spinning. So maybe like a baseball with nice backspin. That's going to help stabilize the projectile. But they take it a step further for most of these rifles, and they shoot what looks like a bullet that is cone-shaped. And so now you're shooting a football that has a really nice tight spiral. And because of that, it is going to go much further, much straighter, much more accurate every single time. So now we're talking, like with the Enfield rifle here, still a huge projectile, .577. That's a pretty big bullet that's going to do some damage. It has a maximum range of over 1,000 meters. That is over half a mile, and it's accurate at 365 meters. That's close to a quarter of a mile. Now you can stand much further away. You can aim, and you can hit your target again and again and again. With one of these Springfield muskets, we could stand end zone to end zone, and you could shoot at me all day, and you're probably not going to hit me. With an Enfield rifle, if we stand end zone to end zone, it's going to take you one pull of the trigger if you know what you're doing, and I'm going to be down. So the guns are much more deadly, but the tactics have not changed. We are going to fight for most of this war. We're going to fight just like we did in the Revolution, in big blocks of human beings in rectangle shapes, shooting at relatively close range, and then maybe hand-to-hand combat. It used to be a lot more hand-to-hand combat. Now it's really hard to cover that ground because, as before you could be 600 meters away, no one's shooting at you. Now they start shooting at you when you're over half a mile away, and so by the time you get to 200 meters away or less and try to make a charge, like we're going to talk about, like with Pickett's charge, by the time you get there to try to go stab a dude with your bayonet, everyone around you is dead, and the charge has failed. So it's going to be very deadly because of these rifles. And then the projectile they shoot, the bullet they shoot, is a soft lead, and it mushrooms out and explodes inside of you, which does a lot of damage. And if it hits any bone, it explodes that bone. And so the only way to deal with those injuries, especially if it hits like a limb, is to amputate. So what's going to happen in this war as well is there's going to be a lot of people who get hit, and what is called a mini ball is the name of the bullet that they shot. A mini ball it's not going to just go through you. It's going to blow out your arm, and they're going to have to cut your arm off. We would, if we had more time, get into more graphic detail about all that, because there's a lot of great stuff about how they would just hack your limbs off and throw it into a pile and move on. But we don't have time for that. You can thank the pandemic. If I were you, I would look up more about that because it's super fascinating and super gross. But let's get to our first major battle of the war, Bull Run. Just about done for today. Bull Run. It is, if this battle happened at any other time in the war, we wouldn't even talk about it. But we're going to talk about it because it is the first really important battle. So it's going to take place here in July. Now, late July 21st, 1861. Now, not much has happened militarily since Fort Sumter. There's been a lot of jockeying for position. There's been a lot of, hey, Kentucky, we want you to secede. We want you not to secede. Hey, Europe, do you want to recognize us? Hey, Europe, please don't recognize the Confederacy. Stuff like that. But not much real military action. There has been a little battle in Philippi, what is now West Virginia. The Philippi Races, it's called, because the Confederates get routed and just sprint on out of there. But this battle at Bull Run in northern Virginia, a place called Manassas Junction, is going to be the first big battle at that time. Now, it's going to pale in comparison to future battles, but it's pretty big at the time. So it's fairly evenly matched, which is also going to be pretty different. Normally in these battles, we're going to see the U.S. side, the Union side, has way more dudes than the Confederate side. At this battle, fairly evenly matched, 35,000-ish on each side. We have, for the Federal troops, for the Union troops, Irvin McDowell in charge. For the Confederates, a man named P.G.T. Beauregard, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, super French-sounding dude from Louisiana. They are in charge, along with a man named Joseph Johnston. They're in charge for the Confederate side. Now, Bull Run is an important place because, as its name, Manassas Junction indicates, it is a junction. There's a bunch of train yards that come together. A bunch of train tracks come together here. The Federal troops move on down. Now, this is fairly well publicized and, in fact, gets a nice crowd. A bunch of people from D.C. in their Sunday best come out to have a picnic and watch the battle because, after all, this is going to be the only battle of the war. You don't want to miss it. It should be a good time, right? So people literally go down in their carriages, most of them rooting for the Union, rooting for the U.S. side. They go down in carriages. They take a picnic lunch. They're all dressed up. They have their, some of them have like their binocular glasses and stuff like that so they can watch. They're going to watch a battle because what both sides are expecting is for the other side to just flee. Now, both sides are super inexperienced. The Confederates have better generals, but at this point, no one on either side's really ever been in a big battle. They don't know what to expect. They don't even have uniforms for each side, or uniforms, right? On both sides, everyone's wearing whatever. So, like, not everyone's in blue on one side and everyone on gray on the other. There's people in green, there's people in brown and blacks, there's people in gray on both sides, there's people in blue on both sides. It's very confusing in the battle. Plus, Civil War battles, you get a couple thousand people firing guns and cannons at the same time. Smoke goes everywhere. It's really hard for everyone to tell who's who. And there are going to be some instances of some pretty deadly friendly fire in this as well. Now, early on, the North has the advantage, and they are pushing the South back, and they have more men, and it looks like they're going to push the South out of Manassas, and the hope is, right, Manassas is just outside of Richmond. Richmond's just a little further down to its south. The hope for the North is, for Irvin McDowell, is they're going to march in, they're going to defeat the Confederates are going to break and run away, they're going to march into Richmond, bada bing, bada boom, war over. And at first, it kind of looks like that might happen. But the South, they stiffen their backs thanks to Thomas Jackson, where this is the battle where he earns his nickname Stonewall. In fact, the story goes that while one Confederate unit was starting to retreat, the guy in charge, the general in charge of that unit, of that brigade, said, "Hey, let's stop retreating. Look at the Virginians over there. Look at Jackson standing like a stone wall." And so that helped hold the tide, stop the Union from routing the Confederacy. Right at a critical time, Johnston shows up, unloads a bunch of guys off of trains. Right, there's that technology again, and reinforces the Confederacy. And then the South turns the tides. So Jackson stops the Union from breaking through. A bunch of Confederates show up by train and turn the tide. Now it's the time for the Union to break, and boy, do they break. At some point in the battle, late in the day, the Union kind of loses their momentum, they lose their cool, they lose their wherewithal, they break and run. And I mean, they literally run. A lot of them just throw their stuff down and start to run back to D.C., which isn't crazy far, right? D.C. is only right up in here, but they run back to D.C. Now, it gets even worse because the crowd, right? Remember all the picnickers, all the picnic goers? They freak out. Right? Most of these people are here to watch the North win. They freak out. They try to get in their carriages. They jam the roads back to D.C. as well. So the road to D.C. is littered with military gear, is littered with civilian gear, and people all over the place trying to get back to D.C. In fact, a Union congressman gets caught by the Confederates because he can't get out of there. Now, this could be a very dangerous situation for the North, but the South isn't experienced, they're tired, they're disorganized, they do not follow up and attack. They would like to. Jefferson Davis comes to the battlefield right after it's over and is like, "Why are we hanging around here, Beauregard, Johnston? Why aren't we marching north towards D.C. to try to take their capital?" And the generals explain, "We're tired, we're disorganized, we can't do much about it." So the very first big battle of the war goes to the Confederates. The Union looked really bad, right? People are not going to remember that the Union almost won the battle at one point. Who cares? You almost won. You got embarrassed. You got humiliated. The other thing that's going to be very shocking to most people is the number of casualties. And remember, that is killed, wounded, missing, or captured. For the Union, there's about 3,000 in this one afternoon, and for the Confederates, it's roughly 2,000. So that's about 5,000 people in an afternoon, which is nothing compared to what we're going to talk about in the future. That's sadly nothing. This battle doesn't even register. Like I said before, 35,000 dudes on each side and only 3,000, 5,000 casualties. We wouldn't talk about that if this battle happened in 1863. Like, it just wouldn't register. But at the time, this is shocking. No one has seen stuff like this before, right? The bloodiest battles in the War of 1812. When we talked about the Mexican-American War, we barely had anyone getting shot the entire war. Everyone was dying from disease, and that was it, right? So to have 3,000 people shot on just one side, huge, huge number, eye-popping. Looks bad for Lincoln. Some people think, hey, that's probably it. That's probably the war, right? No. Lincoln is like, all right, let's get some more dudes. Let's try it again. But that'll have to wait till 1862. Last thing, super quick. Slavery. Going to touch on this from time to time because, again, this war is about slavery, but at this time, Lincoln's not making an objective of the war about slavery. So early on in the war, what is Lincoln doing about slavery? Remember, this is a war for reunion, not to end slavery. Especially if you got to remember, Lincoln still has 4 states. Whoop, there we go. 4 states that are slave states. He doesn't want to lose places like Kentucky that he said is so important the war would be lost without it. He can't just say, I'm going to free all the slaves. Because Kentucky's going to say, I'm out of here. Can't do that yet. So he is still focused on reunion. And what they're going to do is in 1861, they pass a law called the Confiscation Act that says if you're a slave that is being used by the Confederate Army, we will free you if you come to the Union line, essentially. But that's it. That's it. Right? If the Confederate Army is using you to like dig trenches or move things for the Army, then you are now what is considered contraband, and therefore we will seize you. Now, the Union Army will seize these slaves, kind of give them freedom, let them work in the Union Army, protect them, not make them be slaves, but that is it. You have to make your way there. In fact, a guy named John C. Fremont is a commander in Missouri. He tries to mandate emancipation for slaves in Missouri. The Missouri slaveholders go crazy. Lincoln actually revokes it, says, no, Missouri, you can keep slaves. You can keep slavery. So at this point in 1861, Lincoln is not freeing slaves. He is sticking to his word of, I don't want it to spread, but I'm not trying to free people. He is freeing these few contraband, but that is it. All right, that is it. Now, last thing for you guys, three lecture questions to add to your activity sheet. 1, does it matter that the Confederacy fired the first shots of the war? 2, knowing what you know about the strengths and weaknesses, which side is best situated to win at the beginning of the war? And 3, does his handling of slavery in 1861 change how you view Lincoln? Why or why not? Put those along with the other question that I already had for you on your activity sheet and hold on to it. Do not turn it in yet. Please do not turn that in. I appreciate all of you stopping by and watching this video. Hopefully you found it informative. I tried to keep it as brief as I could, a little longer than I wanted, but this is probably how it's going to go from here on out. If you need any help, have any questions, want any more resources, need anything at all, please email me, send me a message on Schoology. Please keep getting me your work. And, have a good one. Stay safe, stay sane. I'll see you guys in 1862.